Okay, in today's lesson, I want to talk to you guys about basic functions in Excel. Now, it would be my guess that in high school, many of you got a chance to work with Excel at least a little bit, and you probably wrote one or two functions in Excel. That said, I want to make sure that you're really comfortable before we get into more advanced financial functions in understanding the basic concepts of how functions work in Excel, what they are, how to use proper syntax, how to use Intellisense, and how to use AutoSum when possible. So just to jump right in, what is a function? What is a function in Excel? Well, to think about that, you got to think about what Excel really does. So, Excel is a lot of things, as you've learned throughout the first chapter of your textbook. But one of the great things that Excel has built into it is the world's greatest calculator. So, here you see one of the old tried and trues, the TI-84 calculator. My guess is some of you have that calculator right now. And if not the 84, then the TI-93 or the TI-81. It's a classic. I had it in high school 15 years ago, probably more than 15 years ago. You guys had it in high school just last year. So one of the things about these really expensive calculators that you'll see, you know, there's a million of them, is they've got about a million buttons on them. That's what I'm circling right here. Well, you probably know, and if you don't, all those buttons are pre-built in functions. So what is a function? A function is basically a pre-built in feature that gives you the ability to do something that you could do on your own much faster, like average. You all know how to average on your own. You can average by hand, but by using an average function, things can go a lot faster. More complicated things you might see with the statistic calculator, something like standard deviation. Well, in Excel, the good news for you guys is pretty much every single version of the TI-84, or not the 84, but the TI calculators that you guys have used in school so far, well, all those functions are built into Excel. And you can see them by going to the Formulas tab and looking through the function library. So here's a way to look at this. Each drop-down menu here is the equivalent to one of those fancy calculators that you have. They all do just different things. So for example, here would be your statistical calculator. Here would be your TI-93 financial calculator, and it'll do things like cumulative interest paid, cumulative principal, okay? Things like that. So before we jump into the really complicated stuff, I thought we'd start with really the easy, fun stuff. How do you write a function in Excel? How do you do basic math in Excel? And how can you be more efficient in doing those things? So let's just start with the simple stuff. If you were using this TI-84 calculator and you wanted to do something simple like add up 2 plus 2, well, the last thing you do, you'd hit 2, you'd hit plus, you'd hit 2, is you'd hit this enter button right down here. Well, the fun thing about Excel is it's the exact opposite of that. So if I type in 2 plus 2 in a cell in Excel and I hit enter, I just get 2 plus 2. What you see is what you get. But don't be confused. The magical button in Excel, or the magical character in Excel, is the equals key. So if I click in a cell and I open up by typing an equals key, that tells Excel that it's going to do something automatic for you. So if I type equals and I type 2 plus 2, I get 4. Now, that should be pretty good news for you, because if you've learned one, you've sort of learned them all. What does that mean? It means this. So if you want to subtract, you use the minus sign. You want to multiply, you use the asterisk key. You want to divide, you use the slash that's next to your shift key, backslash. If you want to use something, raise something to a power, you use an exponent key. And then this tricky one right here, the ampersand sign right there, is called concatenate. And that is such a powerful tool in Excel that we have a totally separate video for it. But I'll give you a little taste just so you understand. So say I take Jason and my last name, Davidson. Well, if I wanted to try to add those together, as you might guess, they're not numbers, so I can't do that. But if I wanted to concatenate them, and concatenate is a fancy word for combine, there you have it. But that's another lesson for another day. Back to functions. So functions, let's just start with the most basic function you will see in Excel, which is probably the sum function. Okay, so what's the sum function going to look like? Well, it's going to actually look like that. Okay, so to break down what you're seeing several different things that you've read about, but I'm going to actually type this out again. Well, here's the answer. okay? But I'm going to type this out slower instead of using my shortcut that I just used so you can see exactly how the syntax for a function works. So let's start basic. I've used the word syntax several times. What is syntax? Syntax is a fancy computer guy way of saying sentence or structure. So when you hear someone in computer terms say, oh, this is the proper syntax, basically they're saying this is the proper structure to write a function. So just like when you're writing a sentence, you have nouns and verbs and adjectives. When you're writing a function, you have specific things you do as well. So here's what we've learned so far, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. Here's what we've learned so far. You know that if you want Excel to add up all these numbers, you're going to open up by hitting the equals key. And I'll show you a little trick here to give you a little bit of confidence. If you highlight all the numbers, Excel will actually give you, oh, come on, quick statistics right down at the bottom. So it'll tell you the answer right down here at the bottom. Okay. Hang on, I've got a stray function happening up there. There we go. It'll tell you what the sum is, what the average is, oops, and what the count is before you even write a function. Now, these quick statistics at the bottom, sum, count, average, they're able to be customized by right-clicking, but they're also not really usable inside the worksheet. So if you're doing a report or you're doing any kind of analytics, those numbers will change depending on what you have selected. See, those are changing. So you wouldn't want to count on those, but it's nice if you just want to test your work. So how do you write a function manually? Well, to write a function manually, first thing you're going to do is you're going to hit the equals key. Now remember we talked about that just a minute ago. You hit the equals key to tell Excel that you want it to do something for you. You want to automate this task, okay? So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to type the name of the function. So the most basic function you'll probably ever use in Excel is the sum function, okay? The sum function is very simple to use. It's basically a summary. You're going to add up a set of numbers. It's really easy to use. You're probably not going to be that impressive if you go on an interview and say, well, I know how to use the sum function in Excel. But it wouldn't look good if you didn't. So everybody starts here. Don't worry, we'll work our way up to mortgages in no time. So we're going to start off by hitting the equals key. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to simply type SUM, which is sum. Okay. Now when you do that, this is pretty awesome what Excel does. You see this box that pops up? This box that popped up is called Intellisense. And what that is it's Microsoft Excel trying to help you write a function. So now I could go through and I could manually type this entire function out, but I really don't have to because Intellisense is going to help me write this function. So when I start typing S, it said, hey, do you want to use the search feature? I go, no. U, it goes, how about substitute? What about subtotal? You know, oh, no. But I see that sum is the third one down. So if I highlight sum and I hit tab, look at that. Excel is trying to help me write this function. Now you don't have to do this. I could manually type this whole thing out, and I'm going to break it down for you like the book does in just a minute, but I just wanted to show you that. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to put in arguments. So notice at the bottom, you have this little IntelliSense box. Oops. There we go. So I have this little thing right down here that I'm moving around. What that's doing is it's actually a little cheater box. It's telling you, hey, this is the syntax or this is the structure for the sum function. These are the arguments that you use, and this is how you do it. So you type sum, and then you put in each number that you want to add. So now I could go in and I could do 2, 2, and it would give me 4, okay? That's not the best way to work in Excel. As you've read in the book, it's better to use references for everything, just like the book tells you. So in this case, we're not going to just type these numbers in manually because that's going to take forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter in a reference range. So notice that it now says E6 colon E19. So E6 colon E19 basically says use all the numbers that are in the range of E6. Well, there's E6, right? Just like we learned earlier. E6, boom, all the way through E19. And when you're done with this, you can hit enter and it's going to automatically add it up. You can also do right parentheses and do control enter and it won't go down to the next cell. But ultimately, you've written your first function. No problem. So let's talk about that for just a second. A quick advantages of using cell references versus live numbers. Advantage number one is if this is a project that you do every month, let's say this is payroll, and these are hourly employees. Well, if the hours change and you hard code numbers in here, so if I just type 2, comma 2, comma 3, if I do that, that's what it's always going to be. But by using this reference cell here and here, it automatically becomes dynamic numbers. So if next month this guy makes $75, it's going to automatically update and change. Okay, so let's talk about the syntax of a function for a second, a little bit. Use a little trick to make that lock in. So here is the sum function that adds those numbers up. Okay, so you can break a basic function down into 3 parts. It's a good way to do it. So first, it's the easiest part. You have the equals key right there. Okay, so you know when you type equals inside a cell, Excel's going to start writing a function for you. Okay. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to write the name of the function. So in this case, it's going to be sum, right? So equals, we're going to use sum. And the last thing you're going to do is you're going to enter in the arguments for the function. Now, the arguments can get pretty tricky depending on how many different arguments there are. In this case, for the sum function, there's really just one. Okay, so the sum function with the arguments, so the arguments are entered inside parentheses, left, right, parentheses, like so. Now, here's the awesome part about basic functions in Excel. You learned one, you've learned them all. Okay, so if we go to our next worksheet, we have average. So in the worksheet before, we added up all the numbers. But what if we wanted to do an average? What if we said, okay, what's the average amount of this specific range of numbers, right? Well, the syntax for the average function is pretty easy. I'll zoom in for you again. You're going to hit the equals key, and this time we're going to do average. Now remember what we talked about. The average function has one argument, just like the sum function, and all the arguments are encased inside parentheses. So all I have to do is select my range, and I can hit Control Enter to close it off. And there I have my average, also dynamic changing, okay? Now, if you don't remember what average is, sometimes it's called mu, sometimes it's called arithmetic mean. It's something you've been doing probably since, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade. So it's exactly what you think it is. But there are some functions that are considered basic functions in Excel that maybe you haven't heard of. So here's one that is used quite often. This is the min function, okay? So what is the min function? The min function, min is short for minimum. How would you use this? Why would you use this? Well, let me just do it really quickly and I'll show you. The answer here is going to be 65, I do believe. So I select my whole thing. I get 65. So here's what that did. The minimum function displays the lowest number in a range of numbers. Now in this case, the lowest number in this range of numbers you've given it is 65. Why would we do this? Well, who has the least amount of returns this month? Who has the least amount of absences this month? Who has the least amount of errors this month? That would be something that could quickly be reported using the minimum function. So if you're keeping track, the sum function, how easy was it? Name of the function, argument. The average function, how easy was it? Name of the function, argument. And now the min function, name of the function, argument. So moving forward, I bet you can figure out what the max function does. The max function returns the largest number in a range of numbers versus the minimum function, which returns the smallest number in a range of numbers. So to do max, that's pretty easy, right? We're going to go max. And there you have it, the largest number in a range of numbers. So at this point, I think it's a good time to show you a little bit of a shortcut. So you might have noticed earlier in this video, I was able to very quickly add up numbers. Well, I was able to do that by using a shortcut, which is Alt, the Alt key on your keyboard, and the equals key. That is a shortcut for something called AutoSum. AutoSum. So you can even see it here, Alt equals. Okay, so here's what the AutoSum function does. It's helpful, but it's not super helpful because it can only automatically do basic functions. So I can very quickly go average. I can very quickly go count. I can very quickly go max. Very quickly go min. And all that does is it automatically does that for you. So you don't have to type everything in. Now, sometimes this is very helpful. It's a really good tool for being quick or being efficient. But it's got some shortcomings that I will show you very quickly, which is this. So let me go in and insert right here. So first thing you want to pay attention to is that any blank cell really is a zero value. Now, you know, if you're doing an average, that you average in a zero, that's going to bring your average down, right? It'd be the equivalent of a failing grade. Well, the good thing about Excel is that it's kind of smart, but the bad thing about Excel is it'll never be as smart as you are. So when I go in, if I hit Alt equals and I want to auto sum, or if I want to auto average here, so if I want to go in and say auto average, hey, take a look at what happened. Yes, it selected the numbers for me, but it selected that blank cell too, which means now you were averaging in a zero. So you have to watch out for that if you're using auto sum, okay? So something to think about, okay? So let's jump forward to our last basic function. Basic aggregation function is what we'd call it. That is the count function. So listen really carefully, because when I do this face-to-face in class, I have a lot of fun with it. So listen carefully, let's try this together. The count function counts the number of cells in a range of cells that contain numbers. So in this case, we have a list of employees, right? They're right here in column B. So if I do what this instruction base says, it says count the values in column B. What do you think I'm going to get? 16, 17, something like that, or 0. The reason I got 0 is something that's really important. Excel really cannot read. Excel doesn't like words. You can do things with words in Excel, but not very well. Okay, so if you use the count function, just the count function on its own, what's going to happen is it's going to tell you 0 because there are no numbers. Now, if I were to do that exact same thing and select column C, I get 16. Okay, so the count function is tricky. Let me say it one more time. You can't count words. Okay, very important. Watch out for it on the final and the midterm and the homework. Okay, so usually at this point, I get one last question, which is, hey, Davidson, sometimes you do have to count words. What do we do? Well, if you need to count words in Excel, there's a trick to it. There's a different function that can count words, although it's not really counting words. That function is count A. Okay? So here's what the count A function does. The count A function counts any cell in a range of cells that is not null. N-U-L-L, null. Null is another word for blank. So it counts any cell in a range of cells that is not blank. So does it really know that this says Janice and this says Jim and this says John? No, because Excel can't read. It's just a series of ones and zeros to Excel. Okay? But what it knows is those cells are not blank. There's something in there. So it says 16. Okay? Now, another question that usually comes up from that is, well, why don't you just use count A for everything? Well, you can, but you got to be careful because if you have anything strange like a hyphen or a dash or a period or any kind of thing inside a cell, it's going to throw that count A off because that will count as not being blank. So I just say proceed with caution. Okay? Proceed with caution.